Now that you have a general understanding about different types of flowcharts, let's look at the specific symbols and see what they represent. These symbols are standardized across different software platforms. You can find these symbols in PowerPoint and in Visio, Lucidchart, Google Docs, and other platforms, and they help the reader follow through these different processes from the beginning to the end. Fun fact, before these were all computerized, accountants had an actual physical template, which was a little plastic ruler that had all of these shapes drawn into it so that they could stencil them in to the different documents that they were tracking. So we called that a template. So let's look at our processes. The first one here kind of looks like a pill. We call this one a terminator. And a terminator means this is either where the process starts or ends. For example, a terminator might be a customer who is sending us a sales order. From the terminator, we move over to this rectangular box. This rectangular box represents a process. And in more complex flowcharts, this would specifically represent an automatic process, meaning something that a computer does automatically. From here, we move to this diamond. A diamond represents a decision that we have to make. Frequently, the decision will have two outcomes, either yes or no, or true or false. If it is yes, then we are going to follow the path down one direction to a new symbol. If it is false, then we will go to a different symbol. This second row of symbols represents where we can store some types of data. The first one we see here is a cylinder, and this is where we store data in a database. So a database is frequently represented by a cylinder. This database will have multiple tables that contain information that are linked together. The reason that we use a cylinder for this icon is because once upon a time, hard drives that were stored in computers that contained all this data were actually physical cylinders that were written on magnetic disks. As you had more data, you had more disks inside of that. And so databases were stored on these magnetic disk formats. Now we have moved to solid-state drives and flash memory that are much faster at reading and writing data. We're going to connect this to the next symbol, which represents a data store, meaning this is a specific location for data within that database. This could be a sales journal, for example, or a customer file. So if we're storing something or locating something in a specific data set, we'll use this parallelogram. By the way, this dashed line represents data transfer, such as when we're looking up data from a database or we're storing it somewhere. From our data, we move over to this next one, which is kind of an odd shape, so it's sort of a rectangle with a squiggly line underneath. This is what we use to represent a document. And one way to think of it is as if we had a piece of paper that was cut off halfway. And the document could be one page or it could be several pages that go on and on. So documents include things like checks, invoices, a sales order, and so forth. From our document, we're going to go down to this next one, which is a rectangle with an angled side. This represents manual input. And we use this symbol because it looks like a computer keyboard from the side. Imagine if it had keys popping out of it, and you could see why we would use this symbol. Whenever you see the symbol, someone has to physically sit at the keyboard and enter in some data. For example, if this document was a sales order, I would go from the sales order down to this manual input where I would type it into the computer system. Then we're going to go over to this trapezoid, and this trapezoid, with the angles coming down, represents a manual process. So just like we had talked about the automatic process before, a manual process involves some manual labor. So an automatic process may be calculate the tax. A manual process would be take these pieces of paper and staple them together, or make a photocopy. And then these last two symbols are called connectors. If it's a circle, we're going to connect to something that's on the page. If it looks like a home plate here, this is going to be an off-page connector. These connectors are used to simplify a diagram so you don't have lines going all the way over your page. If I have a very complex diagram and I only have another process, but I have some space further off, I'm going to say I want to connect this to on-page connector A, and then later on in the page I'll have another circle A that will continue with the process and go on with the flowchart. Similarly, an off-page connector B is going to go to a completely separate page and continue my process there. So these are the basic symbols that we're going to see, and they're fairly common across different diagrams. There are more complicated ones, but as long as you've got a good handle on these, you can infer what the rest of the symbols will be, or look them up as you encounter them. Now we're going to look at a data flow diagram. This one's a bit of an exception to the other types of flowcharts that we see, because the symbols are different, and the organization is a little strange. A data flow diagram, once again, is here to show us the flows of data through a system. So here we have 4 different symbols. We have a rectangle, which represents an external entity. Remember, in a flowchart, it was a process. Here it's not, it is an external entity. So this would be the source of data or the destination of data. An external entity could be a customer who's going to send us a sales order. Then we have a curved line. This represents my flow. And then a circle is going to be my data process. Again, in a regular flowchart, the process would be a rectangle, not a circle. So make note, this is a special case. Then we can connect this to this incomplete rectangle, which we're going to call a data store. One way to remember this is it looks kind of like a book from the side. So a data store, this is where we're going to put data for a temporary holding, or we're going to refer to data that we need to do some calculation. Okay, so only 4 symbols. You'll want to memorize these. This is where it gets a little weird. Within a data flow diagram, we have different layers. It's kind of like different power that you would see on a microscope. You start with one lens, you can see the high-level view. You switch to another lens, you can see it closer. You switch to a third lens, and you can see all of the details of the cells that you're looking at. In a data flow diagram, that zoomed out lens, we're going to call our context diagram. A context diagram is unique because it only has one process. So let's say that we're looking at the sales process. I have a data source, which would be my customer, and then I have a destination, which might be my fulfillment center. So a context diagram has only one process here, sales. The second level we are going to call a level 0 data flow diagram. Level 0 means the 0 is the important decimal place. Okay, hold on with me for a sec. With my level 0 data flow diagram, I'm going to have that same source, the customer, right here, and I'm going to have the same destination, which is my fulfillment center. And now that sales process is going to be broken apart into different processes. So when I receive data from my customer, it's going to go into process 1.0, which might be something like record sale. Then this will continue on to process 2.0, which might be to ship the goods. And that's where I'm going to send some data to my fulfillment center. And then finally, I'll have process 3.0, which will be my billing to the customer. I send the customer an invoice, and they will pay me money. So I took that original sales, and I expanded it to see the parts that were in that original process. You with me okay here? Now it's going to get a little more detailed. We're going to take this process and we're going to expand it even more. Our next level down is going to be called a level 1 data flow diagram. Again, this is talking about the important decimal for this. What that means is that I still have the same customer that's originating this data. The sales order comes in, and now each of these processes, the 1.0, is going to have sub-processes within it. So for example, when I'm recording the sale, process 1.1 might be check the credit. And then process 1.2 would be record sale. So both of those are part of that 1.0 process. And now we're seeing the decimal, which is coming up in this process. Right? Level 0, the important decimal was to the left of the decimal place. Now level 1 is the first place after the decimal. Process 2.0 was ship. Well, that might involve different processes. So 2.1 may be picking it off the shelves. Process 2.2 is packing it in the box, and then 2.3 is shipping it off. So all three of these are part of that process, and we can follow the sequence. And this is going to interact with my fulfillment center. And then finally, we're going to come back here and we're going to see process 3.0. 3.1 may be generating the invoice. 3.2 may be cash collections. So the data comes through, we send that information to the customer. This is all part of that 3.0 process. So as we go down the different levels in a data flow diagram, we get more and more detail into what's going on. We could go to level 2 and see what's going on in that credit process or that recording sales process if there were more details to contain there. The main thing to remember from data flow diagram is that you're going to interact with different symbols, external entities, process, data stores, and data flows. You just have to memorize them. You don't want to get tripped up with these when you see them on the exam. You'll compare and contrast these to the symbols that we looked at before for regular flowcharts. Make sure you take time to memorize these flowcharts so that when you see them on the exam or on the lab, you understand what process is going on. When you're finished here, do an internet search for flowchart symbols and see all of the different types of symbols that you'll come across. And then we'll see you in the next video.